Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our presentation today, Overcoming Burnout, How to Thrive and Not Just Survive in Your Dental Practice. I'm Kelly Bach with ProSites, and if you're not already familiar with us, we develop customizable practice websites as well as marketing and efficiency software to make running and growing your practice as easy and streamlined as possible. Today, I'm very excited to be joined by Booth Andrews, who is a speaker, consultant, strategic coach, and founder of the Booth Andrews Company. Every day, Booth works with organizations and individuals on stress management, resilience, burnout prevention and recovery, and mental health and well-being programs and strategies. And today, she's going to spend the next hour guiding us through how to prevent and heal from burnout, shift our mindset around our stressors, and build habits to protect your well-being, even in the midst of work and life stress, which, as we all know, can stay at a perpetual all-time high when you're working in or running a dental practice. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to submit them through the chat. We'll answer as many as we can at the end of the presentation, but if we aren't able to get to yours live, we will be sure to follow up with you after the event. Additionally, we'll be sending out the recording and handouts to all registrants after the webinar. So if you have to hop off early or if you have a colleague who wasn't able to attend live, you'll still get access to all the information. Lastly, after the webinar, a quick survey will pop up on your screen. We would greatly appreciate if you took just a moment to fill it out, let us know how we did, what you liked, what you didn't like, and what you'd like to see from us in the future. And so without further ado, thank you guys again so much for joining us, and I will hand it over to Booth.
Thank you, Kelly, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm really excited and grateful to have this opportunity to share with you. I'd love to just start with a check-in. So wherever you're sitting, if you'll just kind of settle into your chair, feel the seat underneath you, your feet on the ground, feel the back of the chair supporting you. Take a breath or two and just check in with yourself. How are you feeling right now? There's no right or wrong answer. Just take a moment to pay attention. Okay, so we're going to hold those thoughts for just a few minutes, and when we get further on in the presentation, I'll kind of loop you into why we just did that exercise. So our goals for today, as Kelly already spoke to, we want to teach you to complete the stress cycle, learn how to prevent or heal from burnout, learn how to respond to stressors with intention, because dealing with the stress is not the same thing as dealing with the stressor, and learn how to build strength and confidence that you can navigate whatever life is throwing your way during these very stressful times. So stressors are what activate the stress response in your body. Anything you see, hear, smell, touch, taste, or imagine could do you harm. External stressors include work, money, family, time, cultural norms and expectations, experiences of discrimination, and so on. Internal stressors include self-criticism, body image, identity, memories, and the future. Our stress response is an evolutionary response. It is the neurological and physical shift that happens in your body when you encounter a perceived threat. It was designed to keep you alive, say if you were being chased by a saber-toothed tiger. In response to a perceived threat, your heart beats faster, so your blood pumps harder, your blood pressure increases, and you breathe more quickly. Your muscles tense, your sensitivity to pain diminishes, your attention is alert and vigilant, focusing on short-term, here and now thinking. Your senses are heightened, your memory shifts to channel its functioning to the narrow band of experience and knowledge most immediately relevant to the stressor. Plus, your other organ systems get deprioritized. Your digestion slows down and your immune functioning shifts. Ditto to growth, repair, and reproductive functioning. All of this to prepare you to run. But when is the last time you actually ran when you were stressed? With a shout out to any runners out there. And our habitual and conditioned responses to stress don't accomplish the one thing that our bodies desperately need in that moment, which is to complete the stress cycle. Our bodies are not designed to swim in a bath of stress hormones all day, every day. And change, even positive change, can activate the stress response because our brain actually prefers the status quo. When the duration or intensity of stress is not offset with appropriate recovery and healing processes, then the scale tips toward physical, mental, and emotional illness. Stress isn't bad per se, but stress becomes toxic or damaging when we get stuck in that stress response because we cannot get out of a stressful situation, because the amount or duration of the stress is outpacing our capacity to recover, or because we haven't learned how to complete the stress cycle, so we continue to hold all of that stress in our bodies. Our biological survival strategies may keep us alive, but they don't actually deal with the stress itself. They just postpone the body's need to complete the cycle. Notice that stress, anxiety, burnout, and trauma responses all short circuit our ability to access our executive functioning, the functions that we associate with positive leadership, with successfully running a practice, organizing and prioritizing work, maintaining focus, accessing memory, regulating and processing our emotions, regulating actions and impulses, sustaining alertness, and maintaining consistent effort over time. And when we fail or fall short in these areas, it's easy to think we're just weak or undisciplined or lack moral character, when what is actually true is that our bodies and minds are overwhelmed and need to downregulate. Our conditioning is not helping us because so many of us have been taught to just suck it up, push through, and persist. We have been taught to interrupt the completion of the stress cycle in perpetuity. And not only that, we expect ourselves to show up at high levels of performance day in and day out. Burnout is caused by chronic stress without adequate recovery, which ultimately overwhelms an individual's stress management and coping skills. In one pre-pandemic study, 84% of dentists reported feelings of burnout. According to the American Psychological Association's 2021 Work and Well-Being Survey, 79% of employees had experienced work-related stress in the month before the survey. Nearly 3 in 5 reported negative impacts of work-related stress, including lack of interest, motivation, or energy, and lack of effort at work. And meanwhile, 36% reported cognitive weariness, 32% reported emotional exhaustion, and an astounding 44% reported physical fatigue, a 38% increase since 2019. And while work is most certainly a significant contributing factor to burnout, what causes overall burnout is an accumulation of unmitigated stress that can come from any and all areas of our lives. Burnout is characterized by 3 components: emotional exhaustion, the fatigue that comes from carrying too much for too long; depersonalization, the depletion of empathy, caring, and compassion; and a decreased sense of accomplishment, an unconquerable sense of futility, feeling that nothing you do makes any difference. Another pre-pandemic study showed 54% of clinicians were reporting exhaustion, decreased motivation, more cynical attitudes toward patients, and even catastrophic errors, all resulting from emotional and physical burnout. Symptoms of burnout are things that so many of us have been taught to ignore or think is normal or think is just the cost of success, or maybe we just think something's wrong with us. Physical symptoms include feeling tired and drained most of the time, lowered immunity or frequent illness, frequent headaches or muscle pain, changes in appetite, and changes in sleep habits. Emotional symptoms include sense of failure and self-doubt, feeling helpless, trapped, and defeated, detachment and feeling alone, a loss of motivation, an increasingly cynical and negative outlook, decreased satisfaction and sense of accomplishment. And behavioral symptoms include withdrawing from responsibilities, isolating yourself from others, using food, drugs, alcohol, or other coping mechanisms, maybe too much, and taking out your frustrations on others. Perhaps surprisingly, emotional exhaustion is most strongly linked to a negative impact on our health, relationships, and work. As defined by the American Psychological Association, emotions are a complex reaction pattern involving experiential, behavioral, and physiological elements. At their most basic level, emotions involve the release of neurochemicals in the brain in response to some stimulus. Left to their own devices, emotions will end on their own, particularly if we don't let ourselves get hooked on the stories our brain tells us about why we are feeling the way we are feeling, or why we shouldn't feel that way, or whose fault it is that we feel yucky. Emotional exhaustion happens when we get stuck in an emotion because we are constantly being exposed to situations that activate emotions, because we have been taught that we are supposed to control, manage, and stuff our emotions and ignore the bodily signals that often come with them. And because we may need support from an empathetic witness or professional to help us move through some of the most difficult emotions. Because our emotions have an unconscious physiological component, it is actually a fallacy to think that we can just control them. And our attempts to control them actually give them more fuel and fire. And those unprocessed emotions get stuck in the body, just like unprocessed stress. Instead, we want to learn how to process our emotions by noticing them or the bodily sensations that come with them, naming them if possible, validating them. And yes, seemingly conflicting emotions can coexist and be equally valid at the same time. And then just allow those emotions to move through the body without interference or getting hooked on story. Imagine that you go to the doctor and she tells you that you have stage 1 cancer. Instead of creating a plan and pulling all of the professionals and resources that you need to carry out that plan, you go home, shrug your shoulders, and say, well, nothing can be done. I should just get back to work. It sounds ludicrous, right? But that is often how we handle the signs and symptoms of burnout. And when we do that, we ensure progression, much like cancer. In stage 1, the symptoms are mild, maybe just an annoyance, and they're pretty easy to ignore. In stage 2, the symptoms begin to interfere with our life activities and roles. Maybe a chronic disease becomes harder to manage. By stage 3, symptoms are getting worse and starting to seriously disrupt life activities and roles. You may have good days, but the bad days are getting harder and harder to bounce back from, and the good days are further and farther between. By stage 4, you might end up in the hospital. No, really. Or you become so hopeless that you are ready to leave everything behind. Just over 7 years ago, in March of 2015, I made a plan to make my own life, to take my own life, and I began to implement that plan. But my therapist said that my children would never recover if I took my own life. And so I said, I guess that means I have to live. I was the mother of 3, a community leader, a triathlete, a licensed attorney, and the CEO of a $5 million regional nonprofit. For years, I thought I was a superhero until my body and mind began to fail, at least as I saw it. What I have learned is that our body sends us warning signals, first in a whisper, but if we ignore them, they get louder and louder and louder until eventually our body brings us to a full stop through acute and sometimes fatal illness. So what were the warning signs in more than a decade of being a professional and hyper performer? In my first career, which spanned 10 years, I either didn't take vacation or I worked from vacation. I worked at least one day every weekend and on holidays, with the exception of one day off each for Thanksgiving and Christmas, only giving myself permission to rest when I would wake up and pass out in the shower. In 2000, I had surgery for a sinus infection that I'd had for at least 6 months, and we couldn't clear it up with antibiotics. In 2003, I worked from labor and delivery with my first child. I took 2 weeks of full maternity leave and worked from home with a newborn for the next 10. In 2005, I had surgery for endometriosis, and I had elevated inflammation markers and elevated cortisol, which is a stress hormone. In 2006, I went into preterm labor with my second child at 30 weeks. But I remember walking the hospital hallways, relieved to see Wi-Fi routers on the ceiling, because at least if I was going to be admitted, I could work. In 2008, I reworked myself out of my first career and realized that I couldn't remember the last time that I sat on the floor and played with my then 18-month-old daughter. In 2009, I became a CEO. I did my first triathlon, and I was also on antibiotics for 9 months out of 12. In 2010, I became pregnant with my third child and spent the entire pregnancy trying to figure out how I was going to keep all the plates spinning while being a CEO and a mother of 3. Perhaps not surprisingly, I went into preterm labor at 28 weeks. In 2011, I realized I was emotionally flatlined, and I started having anxiety attacks after my mom's cancer diagnosis changed from a slow-moving cancer to imminently terminal. In 2012, my mom passed away, and at this point, the insomnia, probably going on year 2. The nightmares began and the depression hit. I could no longer do any endurance training activities because my body would not support it. And that Thanksgiving, I had 4 infections at the same time. I also had started having regular panic attacks, and I started taking antidepressants. In 2014, my marriage imploded. And then by 2015, the same year that I decided I couldn't fight anymore, I had high blood pressure, a heart workup to rule out a heart attack. And ultimately, by the end of 2015, I was both divorced and no longer a CEO. I've spent the last 7 years learning to heal and stay well, and I have used lots of different resources and modalities. Therapy, lots of therapy, medication, everything from 200 hours of yoga teacher training to emotion code release techniques, weightlifting, EFT, tapping, Reiki, nutrition coaching, somatic experiencing, and trauma work. It's a lot. And yet, the fundamental building blocks that will allow you to start from where you are today and move toward a life in which you not only survive, but thrive and do your best work are actually simple and completely accessible. There are no hacks. But if you use this knowledge and deploy these tools, I can assure you that you will be healthier, more productive, and more impactful. The path to well-being is a series of small choices we make each and every day. And the building blocks are these. Complete the stress cycle every day. Respond instead of react to stressors. Know when to quit, find meaning, and build strength, capacity, and resilience, which by their very nature will also help you build confidence. Okay, hopefully by now you have at least an emerging understanding as to why it is so important that you complete the stress cycle. So here are the scientifically proven ways to do that. Physical activity. Anything that moves your body enough to get you breathing deeply. Between 20 to 60 minutes per day for most people. But if that feels overwhelming, even just standing up from your chair, taking a deep breath and tensing all of your muscles for 20 seconds, and then shaking it all out with a big exhale is a great place to start. Speak your body's language. It doesn't know what resolving interpersonal conflict through rational problem solving means. It also doesn't know what filing your taxes means, but it does know jumping up and down. Tell your body that you have successfully survived the threats of the day, and now your body is safe. Physical activity is the most efficient strategy for completing the cycle, but there are other strategies as well. Breathing exercises. Breathing exercises are great when your stress isn't super high, because I don't know if you've ever tried to breathe deeply when you're already completely and totally stressed out. It's kind of challenging. Or when you need something to hold you over until you have more time. We're going to actually practice a breathing exercise today that's called box breathing. And we're going to try to do that for a few cycles and just notice and observe if anything shifts in your body as you do this exercise. So again, both feet on the floor, feel the chair supporting you, let your weight kind of relax against the back of your chair. You can close your eyes or keep them open and take a couple of inhales and exhales. On your next inhale, I want you to inhale to the count of 4, hold for a count of 4, exhale for a count of 4, hold for a count of 4. And we'll do that together a couple of times. Inhale, 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 1, 2, 3, 4. And keep repeating that cycle. And after your next exhale, go ahead and return to breathing normally. The next way to complete the stress cycle is positive social interaction. Casual but friendly interaction with other people is a great external indicator that the world is safe in this moment. Smile at someone, compliment them, hold the door open, look them in the eye. Laughter. Belly laughs help build and maintain social bonds and help regulate emotions. Affection, deeper connection with someone who likes, respects, and trusts you. You can try a 6-second kiss because you know you're not going to kiss somebody you don't like for 6 seconds, or hugging until you're relaxed with both people equally bearing their own weight. This type of affection lowers your blood pressure and also your heart rate. And oh, by the way, if you are a pet lover, affection with your pets, I mean, maybe not the 6-second kiss, but affection with your pets totally counts. Crying. Crying releases stress and endorphins, builds connection and empathy, and not crying is actually bad for your health. And creative expression. Before you shut down here, some of you may be naturally creative, and painting, sculpture, music, theater, storytelling are all great ways to complete the stress cycle. If you don't consider yourself creative, listening to or engaging in creative expression. So listen to music or watch a movie and let that creative experience take you through the various phases of an emotional experience. Signs you need to deal with the stress before you can deal with the stressor. Remember how all of our resources are channeled for survival? When we are perpetually stressed or shut down, we might find ourselves doing the same thing, an apparently pointless thing, over and over again, or engaging in self-destructive behaviors. When your brain gets stuck, it may start stuttering or repeating itself like a broken record. You might notice yourself checking things, picking at things, thinking obsessive thoughts, or fiddling with your own body in a routinized sort of way. I often find myself clicking all of the open tabs on my 4 open browser windows when I'm feeling overwhelmed. These are signs that the stress has overwhelmed your brain's ability to cope rationally, and you need to deal with the stress before you can take on the stressor. Chandeliering is Brene Brown's term for the sudden, overwhelming burst of pain so intense that you can no longer contain it, and you jump as high as the chandelier. It is out of proportion to what is happening in the here and now, but not out of proportion to the suffering you are holding on the inside. And it has to go somewhere, so it erupts. And that can be an actual physical pain eruption, or it can be just an emotional eruption. The eruption is the sign that you are past your threshold and need to deal with the stress before you deal with the stressor. Hiding from your life. When your brain is stuck in the middle of the cycle, it may lose the ability to recognize that the threat is gone. And so you're still hiding. That is, you come home from work and watch cat videos while eating ice cream directly from the container, using potato chips for a spoon. Or you stay in bed all weekend, hiding from your life. If you're hiding from your life, you're past the threshold. Deal with the stress so that you can be well enough to deal with the stressor. And as I explained when talking about burnout, when your body is not okay, maybe you're sick all the time, or you're in chronic pain, or have injuries that just won't heal, or infections keep coming back. Because stress is not just stress, but a biological event that really happens inside your body. It can cause biological problems that really happen inside your body, but can't always be explained with an obvious diagnosis. Chronic illness and injury can be caused by or exacerbated by a chronic activation of the stress response. And the stress isn't actually the problem. The problem is that the strategies we've been taught to deal with stressors have almost no relationship at all to the strategies that deal with the physiological reactions our bodies are having in response to the stressors. To be well is not to actually live in a state of perpetual safety and calm, but to move fluidly from the state of adversity to risk, adventure, and excitement back to safety and calm and out again. Stress isn't bad for you. Being stuck is bad for you. Wellness happens when your body is a place of safety for you, even when your body doesn't necessarily feel like it's in a safe place. So here are the step-by-step instructions for completing the stress cycle. Find what works for you. You may already know which of the proven practices work for you to complete your stress cycle, but if you don't already know what they are, experiment until you find a few options to choose from. I encourage people to actually write these things down, because often if we are not in the habit of releasing our stress cycle in an intentional way, the more stressed we become, the harder it is to remember what actually helps us feel better. So once you've figured out what stress cycle completion practices work for you, make a list and put it somewhere you can find it. And then schedule completion of the stress cycle for 30 minutes per day, every day. Yes, every day. because there is a very high probability that you are exposed to stress every day. And you may actually have a backlog of uncompleted stress cycles that you are holding in your body. So how do you know that you've actually moved through a stress cycle? If you pay attention over time, and again, it might take a little while if this is not a practice that you've been engaging in, but over time, you'll be able to feel just maybe even the tiniest physiological shift. You're looking for incremental changes over time, but a moment at which maybe you just kind of exhale and you realize that you've released part of what you've been holding and carrying with you. Okay, so we've talked about the physiological processes that are happening in our bodies when we face a perceived threat, and that if we do not complete the stress cycle, the stress gets stuck in our body. And over time, that stress can wreak havoc on every system of the body. And we've even talked about scientifically proven ways to complete the stress cycle. But imagine that you are already in the middle of a stress response. Maybe it is in the face of stress that's happening right now. And maybe you're just overwhelmed and cannot process it all. Like you cannot even remember what we just learned about the stress cycle or how to complete it because you're so caught up in what's happening in your body right this moment. So this is where we triage. And here are some of my favorite triage techniques. Drink a big glass of water. Dehydration actually compounds the stress response in the body. It's another stressor. Go outside and put your bare feet in the grass. Walk away. Leave your phone and all of your technology behind, maybe for 5 minutes or 10. Turn on nature sounds and listen to them when you have a quiet moment. Stand up and stretch gently. Listen to a favorite song. Take a dance break. Balance your inhale with your exhale or use the box breathing that we tried earlier. Or connect to your 5 senses. And we're going to try that exercise right now so you know what I'm talking about. So take a moment and look around you. And I want you to notice 5 things you can see in your immediate environment. Then identify 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. The goal here is to send a signal to your nervous system that you aren't actually dying right now, and to diffuse the hyperarousal that comes with the flood of stress hormones, and to prepare you to deal with the stressor in an intentional way. Okay, so we've learned to complete the stress cycle, but completing the stress cycle doesn't actually fix whatever stressed us out in the first place. And it seems as if stressors are everywhere, particularly over the last few years. The truth is that we are not always in control of the stressors, but we are in control and responsible for the way we respond to the stressors in our lives. We want to break out of reactivity into response. We want to make sure that we have access to those executive functions that I talked about earlier. When we respond instead of react, we are more likely to be strategic, creative, and intentional with how we solve the problem. When we react, we are impulsive, automatic, unproductive, and possibly make matters worse. Remember what happens to your brain when you're in a stress response. Think about that fiery email you may have sent, or the argument you might have picked with someone, or the accident or error of judgment that took place when you were being reactive instead of responsive. So how do we deal with stressors? First, we have to notice or acknowledge that there's a stressor. This could be harder than it sounds, since so many of us have been taught to ignore or downplay the stress in our lives. Then we want to complete the stress cycle, or use a triage technique to ground and regulate your nervous system a little bit. And then remember that you have a choice. You get to choose how you respond to a stressor. Maybe you do some strategic problem solving so that you can try to avoid that stressor the next time. Maybe you reevaluate your goals and adjust your target. Maybe you reframe your experience and remember that even when things don't go our way, sometimes good things happen. Remember, the discovery of penicillin was actually an accident. And then there are 2 additional strategies I'm going to spend a little bit more time on today that can help us deal with stressors: knowing when to quit and making meaning. There's a moment in time when the monitor in our brain switches its assessment of the goal from attainable to unattainable, or determines that the risk outweighs the reward. Sometimes we find ourselves caught up between giving up and pushing through, and we're not really sure what to do. So here's a practice that can help. Write 4 lists and then make a decision based on your estimates of maximizing the benefit and minimizing cost, remembering to consider both short-term and long-term goals. Ask yourself, what are the benefits of continuing? What are the benefits of stopping? What are the costs of continuing? And what are the costs of stopping? And if you decide to continue, remember to include completing the cycle in your plan. Sometimes we just know that we've done all that we can do. And I know that we have a cultural aversion to quitting. We are conditioned to persist and see a shift in goals as weakness or failure. And we have a tendency to cling to something that's broken, that we already have, rather than let something go and open up the possibility of something new. And because we feel fear and anxiety about giving up, our decision making is affected. And so the more stressed we are about making the change, the less likely we are to do it. The resource abundance of your environment changes whether you decide to quit or stay. The more resources you have, the more likely you will quit and move on. But if you're feeling not just frustrated and challenged, but helpless, isolated, and trapped, like you want to hide in a cave or disappear from your life, and completing the stress cycle isn't helping, those are signs that you really should seriously consider quitting. The quality of your life day to day is measured by your freedom to choose to stay or leave. And that freedom comes when you have abundance enough and safety enough to let go of what is broken and reach for something new. And I recognize that we don't always have the privilege to do that, but often we do have more power to quit than we give ourselves credit for. And then making meaning. Meaning is a power you carry inside of you. It helps you stay constant in a storm. It can also increase your well-being and help you resist burnout. And yet, if you sacrifice your real human needs at the altar of meaning, meaning alone cannot save you. But it is easier to tolerate suffering if we know why. And not knowing why is its own form of suffering. Now, that's not the same thing as saying that everything happens for a reason. And so I want to make sure I point that out. Qualities of meaning include meaning isn't actually always fun, but it does offer a positive final value that an individual's life can exhibit. Meaning is not constant, but whether it supports thriving or sustains coping, it is good for you. Rarely is meaning something we find at the end of the long, hard journey. For most of us, meaning is what sustains us on the long, hard journey. And for that reason, meaning is not found, it is made. To make meaning, the research tells us, engage with something larger than yourself. Sources of meaning include pursuit and achievement of goals, ambitious goals that leave a legacy, such as finding a cure for HIV or making the world a better place for kids. Service to the divine or other spiritual calling. And loving, emotionally intimate connection with others, such as raising your kids so they know they're loved no matter what, or loving and supporting my partner with authenticity and kindness. Many sources of meaning combine all three of these. But in terms of your well-being, there is no right or wrong source of meaning. There's just whatever gives you the feeling that your life has positive impact. Okay, so we've learned about stress, stressors, burnout, completing the stress cycle, and responding to our stressors. I love this quote from an Indian monk. The lotus is the most beautiful flower, whose petals open one by one, but it will only grow in the mud. In order to grow and gain wisdom, first you must have the mud, the obstacles of life and its suffering. The mud speaks of the common ground that humans share, no matter what our stations in life. Whether we have it all or we have nothing, we are all faced with the same obstacles: sadness, loss, illness, dying, and death. If we are to strive as human beings to gain more wisdom, more kindness, and more compassion, we must have the intention to grow as a lotus and open each petal one by one. So how do we get stronger, build resilience, increase our confidence in our ability to navigate whatever life throws our way while expanding our capacity for both performance and impact? The good news is it's not rocket science. The bad news is that it may go against everything you have been culturally conditioned to believe, or even how your nervous system has been hardwired to interact with the world. But I promise, if you begin to act on the information you are learning here, even little baby steps taken over a period of time, you will see progress. You will move toward living a life that is more sustainable and aligned with your ability to bring your brightest and best self to the world consistently over time, no matter what the world throws your way. A study of more than 3,000 US veterans who had all experienced trauma found that those experiencing PTSD were more likely than those without PTSD to experience post-traumatic growth. This included both a better sense of personal strength, such as discovering that they were stronger than they thought they were, and knowing that they could better handle difficulties, and an appreciation of life, and having a greater appreciation for the value of their own lives. In order to heal, which the body has an incredible innate capacity to do, and in order to build strength and resilience, you have to give your body what it needs. Your body is designed to oscillate between exertion and rest, activation and recovery across all four of its centers of energy: physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. Even breath is a cycle. When we allow for this oscillation, the quality of our work improves along with our health. What makes you stronger is rest. Rest is quite simply when you stop using the part of you that's used up, damaged, worn out, or inflamed so that it has a chance to renew itself. But more on that in just a minute. Many of us have grown into world-class ignorers of our own needs, just as we were taught to be. We don't even notice that we're ignoring our needs. Our bodies are sending us all kinds of signals all the time, and we're living from the neck up, only attending to the noise in our heads and shutting out the noise coming from the other 95% of our internal experience. Remember the check-in we started with? Your body will tell you what it needs if you listen. You might have to stop what you're doing, take a slow breath, focus on the sensation of your weight on the floor or the chair, and actually ask out loud, what do you need? And you may receive the answer as instantaneous knowing, or as a physical sensation you need to interpret, or as words in your mind. But your body will give you an answer if you start asking. Though the details change as you grow, such as how much sleep and when, and loving attention from whom or what kind of food. The fundamentals do not. Your body needs breath, sleep, food and water, movement and love, and your body dies without them. And if you're asking yourself right now how you're supposed to take the time to be good to your body and live an actual life, that might be a red flag. Contact with another person is a basic biological need, and loneliness is a form of starvation. Connection nourishes us in a literal physiological way, regulating our heart and respiration rates, influencing the emotional activation in our brains, shifting our immune response to injuries and wounds, and modulating our stress response. We literally sicken and die without connection. A 2015 meta-analysis encompassing 70 different studies and over 3 million research participants from around the globe found that social isolation and loneliness increased a person's odds of an early death by 25 to 30%. And yet many of us have been conditioned to believe that the best, strongest, sanest, smartest, and most grown-up people are the ones who don't need anyone to do anything for them. I definitely used to be one of those people. And that healthy people are 100% whole without a need for connection. But what is actually true is that humans are biologically wired to oscillate from connection to autonomy and back again. We all need connection in different doses, but we all need it. And connection doesn't have to be with an intimate partner. It can come from friends, family, pets, and even a connection with the divine. Signs you need to recharge with connection: when you've been gaslit, turn to someone who can relate and do a reality check. When you feel not enough, not enoughness is a form of loneliness because we weren't actually built to do things alone. When you are sad, sadness is a bat signal, and connection helps us find our way through the tunnel. When you are boiling with rage, completing the stress cycle with our loved one's permission positions us not only to avoid damaging behavior, but also to fight for change where it's appropriate. Rest makes us more persistent and productive. Mental energy, like stress, has a cycle it runs through, an oscillation from task focus to processing and back to task focus. The idea that you can use grit or self-control to stay focused and productive every minute of every day is not only incorrect, it is potentially damaging your brain. When you drop out of task-focused attention and into neutral, your neutral brain is not doing nothing. Far from it. In fact, there's very little difference in the amount of energy used by your brain when you're in the middle of doing your taxes and when you're standing at the counter waiting for your takeout order. What's running in the back of your awareness is what neuroscientists call the default mode network, a collection of linked brain areas that function as a kind of low-grade dreaming when your attention is not focused on a task. Default mode network science is pretty new, but what we do know is that the more fluidly a person can toggle from default to attentive, the more creative, socially skilled, and happy a person is likely to be. Mental rest is not idleness. It's actually necessary for your brain to process the world. Walking away from a task or problem doesn't mean you're quitting or giving up, although no shame in quitting or giving up, as we've talked about earlier. But it does mean you're recruiting all your brain's processes for a particular task, including the capabilities that don't involve your effortful attention. Active rest. A muscle that isn't used will atrophy. A muscle that is worked constantly without rest will grow fatigued and eventually fail in exhaustion. And a muscle that gets worked and rested and worked and rested will grow stronger. When you work your muscles, especially your biggest muscles, you strengthen not just the muscles you're using, but also your lungs and liver and brain. Exercising one part of you strengthens all of you. Exercising the strongest parts of you strengthens you most efficiently. And the same goes for cognitive, emotional, and social effort. This is active rest, working one gear while resting the others. People vary in what rest looks like for them, but one universal need is sleep. Our whole body, including our brain, is working hard as we sleep to accomplish life-preserving tasks that can be best achieved if we're not around to interfere. And we are not complete without sleep. Physical activity is not complete without sleep because while you sleep, your bones, blood vessels, digestive system, muscles, including your heart, and all other body tissues are healing from the damage inflicted during the day. If you engage in physical activity, your body will repair itself and grow stronger while you sleep. But physical activity without sleep leaves you more vulnerable to illness and injury than you would have been without the activity. So if you're not going to sleep, maybe you don't need to exercise. Learning is not complete without sleep because memories consolidate and new information is integrated into existing knowledge. Any motor skills you practiced get integrated. The benefits of practice come not from during the practice itself, but during sleep. Without it, your skill will actually decline, no matter how much you practice. If you're not going to sleep, you're studying and practicing for nothing. Emotions are not complete without sleep. Sleep, in one study, professionals who got inadequate sleep were rated by their peers and employees as having lower emotional intelligence, and marital satisfaction is actually linked to sleep quality because lack of sleep heightens your inflammatory immune response to conflict. If you're not getting enough sleep, maybe you shouldn't talk to other humans. We are built to oscillate between wakefulness and sleep because we require the things our brain does on its own during sleep to make us fully functional while we're awake. And you can quite literally die of sleep deprivation by physiological deprivation akin to starvation. When you feel broken, when I feel broken, the first thing I do is go to bed. Inadequate sleep damages your physical health, impairs your brain functioning, affects your communication and decision making, and degrades your emotional and mental health. As someone who slept for only 4 hours a night for the few years leading up to my crash and burn, I understand that it isn't necessarily helpful to just tell someone who has a hard time sleeping to sleep more. And some of you may be in seasons of your lives where sleep is hard to come by. For example, if you have small children at home. Even so, there are things you can do to support better sleep. Complete the stress cycle. If you have dealt with the stressors, like checking off your to-do list, but haven't dealt with the stress itself, your brain is not going to let you rest because it will be constantly scanning the environment for a lion that's about to come after you. So when you try to go to sleep, your brain won't let you fall asleep, or it will wake you up over and over again, checking for the lion. Complete the stress cycle so that your brain can transition into rest. Block time for sleep opportunity, ideally 7 to 9 hours. I am religious about my bedtime. And try to establish consistent to bed and wake times if you can. Set up a sleep routine, a series of a ritual or a series of things that you do as you prepare for sleep every night to let your body know that it's time to wind down. Stay off of your devices for an hour or more before sleep. And for those of you who've gotten an extra long for you night's sleep before and felt worse the next day, when we are sleep deprived, our bodies try to compensate by activating the stress response, sending doses of adrenaline and cortisol to help us survive the stressor of too little sleep. A person who isn't rested may be too sleep deprived to be aware of how sleep deprived they are. And so when you actually sleep and the stress response reduces, and you're better rested, you actually may feel less rested because adrenaline is no longer masking your fatigue. 42%. That's the percentage of time your body and brain need you to spend resting. Approximately 10 hours out of every 24. Now, this can be an average over a week or a month or so. And I'm not saying you should take 42% of your time to rest. I'm saying that if you don't take 42%, 42% will take you. It will grab you by the face, shove you to the ground, put its foot on your chest, and declare itself the victor. Have you ever come down with a terrible cold as soon as you finished a huge project? Or slept 12 to 14 hours per day on your first 3 days of vacation? Or literally ended up in the hospital after a prolonged period of extreme stress? Our biology requires that we spend 42% of our lives maintaining the organism of our physical existence. The payoff of spending more time resting is that during the remaining 58% of your life, you are more energized, focused, creative, and nicer to be around, not to mention a safer driver. You'll be less likely to make mistakes that will cost you later and more likely to enjoy what you're doing. So we've covered a lot, but I want to leave you with this. There are no hacks on the path to well-being, and self-preservation isn't selfish. If you want to bring your best self to your life and work, you must complete the stress cycle, prevent or heal from burnout, and respond to stressors with intention, and build your strength, confidence, and resilience.
Wow, thank you so much, Booth, for just sharing your story so vulnerably and giving us all of these very practical ways to complete the stress cycle in our own lives and, get on the path to greater well-being in our lives. That was amazing, so thank you.
Thanks so
Before we head into the Q&A, for anyone, keep submitting your questions in the chat. I know we've had quite a few come through already. We'll answer as many as we can and then follow up with the rest of you afterwards. But if you are new to ProSites, or maybe this was your first time seeing anything from us, we would really love to get in touch with you. Booth just gave us a bunch of great tips and tricks to start implementing in our lives to manage stress and produce burnout. But technology and automation is another way to really easily decrease your workload and avoid a lot of that unnecessary stress, so you can spend more time working on completing your stress cycle and implementing a lot of these practices. So if you'd like to learn more about how ProSites can help with any of your goals, be that growing your practice, building patient loyalty, automating your administrative tasks, whatever it may be, you can reach us at the phone number and the website on the screen, or let us know in the survey after the webinar and we can reach out to you to talk more. There's also going to be an option in the survey if you'd like to get in touch with Booth. So if you'd like to work with her as well, you can just indicate that. And so now I know we're coming up on the top of the hour, so if you need to jump off, totally okay. But I think we have time for just a couple of questions. A great one to start, let's see. So if I feel overwhelmed and exhausted already, where should I begin?
Thank you, Kelly. And I just want to say, I also endorse, as a small business owner, the power of systems and processes and automations that can help you do the things you need to do for your business without being in that constant kind of stress response and having to remember to juggle all of the things. So systems and processes can be a really supportive component for any business owner. To reduce the stressors in your life so you can spend more time taking care of yourself. If you're already feeling overwhelmed and exhausted just thinking about how tired you are, I want you to start with setting aside those 30 minutes a day to do something to intentionally complete the stress cycle. There's a really good chance you've been building up uncompleted stress cycles for some period of time. And so this could be the first opportunity to start to allow your body to release some of what it's been carrying around. And what is true is that if we want to have the mental and emotional and even spiritual capacity to kind of step into the world and remember that we're connected to each other and connected to something bigger than us, then we actually have to be physically in good shape. That's kind of the base of the Maslow's hierarchy pyramid. So if you're already feeling overwhelmed, 30 minutes a day. If you can't find 30, pick 5. Pick 5 minutes a day to do something that is intentionally designed to complete your stress cycle. And then you can build from there as you build capacity.
I love that. I had seen some other questions come in about how to block out that 30 minutes of time. So I think that that's a great tip as well. Start with 5, work your way up, find time wherever you can, and just slowly start building. You don't have to jump in all at once.
Exactly.
Another question we have is, how can I find out where I am in the stages of burnout?
So if you are curious about where you are in the stages of burnout, you can go to my website at boothandrews.com, and there is a pop-up to take a burnout quiz. I think it's maybe around 15 questions, and then you will get a response that tells you where you are currently in the stages of burnout, stages 1 through 4, and also just some tips on, based on where you are, what could be supportive for you next.
That's awesome. Thank you for that, Booth. We'll be sure to send out that link in our follow-up email as well, just so that you have it. Another question we have is, do you have any other breathing technique recommendations other than box breathing?
Yes. So one of my favorites is actually called cupcake breathing. So when we are stressed, we have a tendency to breathe really shallowly. And so what we want to do is actually focus on extending the exhale first, because if we extend our exhale, our body will naturally kind of want us to inhale. So I like to have people hold up like a birthday cupcake in front of their face and then pretend like they're blowing out the candle. And then if we just let our body do what it's designed to do, we'll have a deeper inhale. And you can try that a few times. And that can again help send your body your body a signal, and your nervous system a signal that allows that nervous system response to start to calm down. So that's another favorite of mine.
Oh, I like that. You heard it here, folks, cupcake breathing. Um, and again, we want to be respectful of your time. So I think we have time for one more question. And then if we don't get to yours live, we will follow up with you afterwards. But I think that this is a really important question. How do I help someone else who I think may be struggling or burned out?
I think one of the most powerful things that we can do is look somebody else in the eye and say, I see you, and it seems like you might be having a hard time, and I just want you to know that I'm here, and if there's anything I can do to support you, please let me know. So many of us are carrying around our stress thinking that we're the only one having the internal experience that we're having. And of course, as we saw earlier, the further we move into the stages of burnout, the more incredibly alone we feel. And so there's some real power in just telling somebody that you see them, that you care about them, that there are resources available, and that they're not alone, and they don't have to go through it alone.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's important just to kind of, don't hold that in when you see it in those around you, whether it's at work, in your family, your friends. It's okay to say something. The world is not going to explode. It's going to mean a lot to them to just see that you care about them.
Absolutely. And you might plant a seed, and maybe it won't even bear fruit right that moment, but you just never know the impact that you can have on other people when you take time to tell them that you care about them, and that there can be hope, and there can be healing, and that you're willing to walk with them on that journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that is all the time we have. I know we went a little bit over, so thank you guys if you stayed with us. Otherwise, we are going to be sending out the recording and handout after this webinar. So if you want to send it, share it to a friend or colleague who you think it could also help, feel free to do that. And once again, don't forget to fill out that short survey that's going to pop up on your screen. And we look forward to seeing you at a future webinar. Thank you guys so much for joining us today, and have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.